Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Habari za leo.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the Africa Center for Cities, Our Future Cities,
Surge Africa and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center,
We are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2023 Action Festival.
Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers
to inspire action for sustainable cities.
This is the third edition of our virtual festival.
it brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent.
This year's theme is The Cities We Want.
the cities we want.
the cities we want.
The cities we want.
This mirrors the African Union 2063 Agenda vision, the Africa we want.
It is a wonderful Pan-African call for transformative change.
However, the agenda does not adequately embrace urbanization as a potential positive force for improving prosperity, inclusivity, and environmental well-being on the continent.
We need more emphasis on the role of cities and local action. And this festival aims to provide inputs into this agenda.
The cities we have are
Expanding,
incomplete,
inventive,
contested,
facing impending crisis, yet brimming with potential.
The cities we want are
people-centered,
Safe and healthy.
beacons of culture,
unflinchingly modern.
And adapting to change and leading global innovation.
We'll make these cities through
Experimenting,
learning
collaborating,
and amplifying the everyday actions of people who are shaping their cities.
The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing,
It invites you to forge new partnerships,
Experiment with new concepts and ideas.
to seek ways to bridge science, business, policy, and the arts.
Together, let's enter this space in the spirit of poetic possibilities.
The cities I want, I already have. In people, all of us children, mommy's sons and daddy's daughters, not raised ideally, but we're still proper. Carrying dust of townships on our skins, unwashable identities and unsolvable complexes, crisscrossing each other with dance, loving where hatred has tried, succeeding where governments have failed. I see monuments in these lives standing here, deities to be worshipped after now, each one gods in their own rights, kings and queens of the yellow and black. We live here together, synchronized dreamers in a city that never sleeps. If there is still one person left grinding on the streets, when you write about a place like Lagos, we do not convolute the language. Come meet us where joy has found us, on the streets where art has found voice, in dance theaters raised on canals, and open mics staged on wooden bridges. I found my cities here, in the people, full of life, each one a road rager, each one a mouthful of curses, each one a mouthful of blessings, each one a hand full of blessings, because that's how it ought to be.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Curry, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the third Rise Africa Action Festival, brought to you by ICLEI Africa, the African Center for Cities, Our Future Cities, Surge Africa, and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center. I'm truly delighted to be kicking off this third festival with a session under the theme, The Cities We Want. And really looking forward to the conversations, both within this series, but across all of the sessions in the festival. And I know that by being here, you've seen the incredibly rich collection of sessions that have already been put forward by partners, colleagues, friends, who wish to explore what African perspectives on urbanization, cities, local action mean and can mean for the continent. So I wanted to start our session today with a bit of contextualization about Rise Africa. It started in 2020, had a few adaptations because of the pandemic lockdowns, and ended up being this remarkably rich space and Pan-African space for people across disciplines and across sectors to come and speak together in a joyful way. To people familiar with this, welcome back. To any newcomers, really looking forward to how you engage this platform, and I hope that it is enriching for you. We were really purposeful in the design of Rise Africa about creating space to center. We were really purposeful about creating space to speak across disciplines and different technical and creative languages. We were purposeful about being joyful about our current context challenges, about the possibilities, and about charting many different potential futures. And I think we should not really take this for granted. I think sometimes I do take for granted that we have such mixed and interesting groups of people coming together. And I think RISE is really unique in bringing people from different parts of the continent who speak different languages, who are each attempting to find their space in making their cities and their societies better. So in 2021, our theme focused on next urban champions, and really was making our initial arguments for RISE, which is that we need to take ownership for the development trajectory of Africa. This was voiced by our regional director, Kobe Brandt, and complemented by Edgar Petersen's refrain that sustainable cities as discourse is always a provocation and an aesthetic register, a daily reminder that we need to simultaneously fight the structural forces that shape our default systems, insatiate alternatives, and design new forms of collective action, love, and imagination. And I really enjoy that drawing in of love and imagination as active elements in how we make our cities. Year 2 brought us together around the theme of creativity, agency, and urgency, and invited us to explore this tension about the need to be creative and imaginative, innovative in how we work, the need to create space for multiple voices, to own space, to share their insights and their agendas and their needs. And both of these processes often taking time and requiring time, but then the underlying feeling that this is an urgent call and needs urgency. And so how did we explore that tension? Malika Ndlovu, who will be facilitating tomorrow's session, invited us in with a refrain. Every story knows its teller. Every story knows its time. Yours and mine has its place and time. It's time. And this refrain grew throughout the session's deliberations and was added to by Bayo Akomolafe, who shared insights into this idea of urgency that perplexes us and is often causing us to miss the meaning of what we're doing sometimes. And he says, based on Yoruba philosophy, in order to find our way, we must become lost. And these times are urgent, and therefore we must slow down. And this was such a counterpoint to a lot of the narratives that we're hearing about sustainable development and the need for Africa's development, which I think was a really fabulous way to frame this discussion. We're coming together around the theme of the cities we want this year. And this is a direct connection, as our opening video said, to the AU Agenda 2063's vision of the Africa we want, which is a really fabulous statement that brings together people from across the continent under this banner of shared prosperity. But being based in ICLEI Africa, we are always looking to see whether the ideas of urban, local, subnational movements are taken into account effectively. And we find this a bit lacking in this agenda. So an aim from the deliberations in this festival is to arrive at the end with a position piece that can complement the ideas in the Africa we want, with a guideline for, or ideas for, how we use urbanization, without being afraid of urbanization, how we use this urbanization trend to deliver on the prosperity that the agenda seeks. So I think throughout this, there are lots of questions that this theme has brought out. And I think today we'll start the conversation, we'll continue through the festival about, well, who is we? So perhaps we can start briefly and share who we are in this room to start. So one of my favorite tools from our colleague Eddie was the idea of a Zoom shower. So I'd like to request everyone to write into chat, don't send it yet, but to write into chat your name, organization, and the city that you're coming from. And hold on for about 30 seconds while everyone does it. And we can get to see who all is in the room with us. So I'll type in my name. We can take 15 more seconds to put that into chat. And then when I say go, we'll get a nice rain of who all are with us here. Okay, go. Lovely to see you all. Lovely to see familiar names and new names. So in looking at the overall festival, not just in this session, we had quite a number of registrations, about 1,600 registrations for different sessions from 780 individuals who hail from 244 cities around the world. And what's really exciting to me is that while this conversation is about Africa and led by Africans, there are colleagues from around the world participating in it. And I think that's really exciting to me to have a global resonance with some of the ideas that we're talking about. In our registrations community, we're mostly women, and we're mostly between 26 and 35. But there are a number of different age groups that this platform is speaking to. And I'm sure there'll be more analysis after the festival. Where we're coming from is mostly Cape Town, Nairobi, Kigali, Pretoria, Abuja, Lagos, Accra, Johannesburg, Freetown, Durban, Dar es Salaam, Kisumu, Lusaka, and many other cities across the continent. So welcome, everyone. What we articulated in response to the cities we want are many of our favorite words: sustainable, safe, clean, bringing nature in, diverse, well-working, functional, green, inclusive. Access is a big theme. Smart, circular, climate-friendly, healthy. So these refrains are shared, and we're really excited to put together more of a substantive collection about our visions based on what everyone's put in. But I'm hoping that in these conversations, we can get at both the depth of what we mean by these, what makes this unique to our cities, and how we approach these, given that most of our conversations have been about the importance of process in driving change. We've broken the conversations of the cities we want into 3 sessions. So you've arrived in day 1, the cities we have, and really excited to hear from each of our esteemed speakers here. But I'd like to remind everyone that this is the first of a series of 3 conversations, and we would really like to encourage you to register in, yes, a rather long registration form for day 2 and day 3, which will be carried forward with ideas of the cities we want, facilitated by our colleague Malika Ndlovu, and then the cities we deserve, facilitated by our colleague Fumi Adeniyi. And the idea of breaking it into these 3 is that today we're going to seed the conversation with the idea of the assets that we have at our disposal. We know that most conversations about African cities start with challenges and potential opportunities, maybe, but given that our positionality as rises to be joyful or positive, we really want to look at, yes, what are the struggles we're facing, but what are the opportunities that are emerging. This will be taken forward in the futuring and visioning conversations, a lot of the poetic conversations tomorrow, and then a deeper engagement around who are we and and how do we make our cities, led by for me. There are also a fabulous set of lunchtime lectures from 12 o'clock after this session, which explore a number of themes around storytelling, social entrepreneurship, broader global policy and global goals, the need to stress different lenses on cities, focusing on women or the lens of a child, and then a few people speaking to specific projects around specific needs such as housing and architecture and the role of architecture in making cities. I'd like to give a really special thank you to everyone who has submitted sessions into the festival. We have 22 additional sessions beyond the morning sessions and the lectures, and we really invite you to explore this really rich program and join and add your insights to this conversation. So I feel like I've done quite a lot of talking, definitely more than I intended. But I thought it was really important to contextualize where we've come from and how this conversation is fitting into the broader ideas of Rise Africa. So I'd like to start us off in this conversation, the cities we have, with another question into the Zoom shower, which is that by the end of this, we're going to put together a document that documents the ideas of the festival, but also tries to articulate a few key things that the AU and partners across the continent can do to harness urbanization for shared continental prosperity. So with that, I'd like to do another Zoom shower. I'd like to ask you each, what is the most important or urgent action that we can take to move towards the cities that we want? And how do we use these actions to achieve the Africa we want? So let's take a minute and daydream a little bit. I know a few of you have put this into registration forms earlier, but it would be really valuable for us to have this as a starting point and to frame some of this discussion as well. So what is the most important or urgent action that we can take to move towards the cities we want? And how do we harness this urbanization? So I'll give us a minute to put this into chat. Take as much time as you need. And then when I say go, we'll get a few answers to set us off into our conversation. So again, let's take 30 more seconds. What is the most urgent or important action we can take to move towards the cities we want? Thanks, Yona. You've jumped the gun. This is great. We see some coming in. Why don't we click go and let's see what other ideas people have. Fabulous. So to read a few, social dialogue and negotiation with representatives workers in the informal economy, such as street vendors, market traders, waste pickers, informal transport drivers, subsistence fisher people, community health workers, etc. From Pat Horn, thank you. A people-centered approach from Idris. Youth inclusion in local and national government decision-making roles. Ivan says slowing down. So yes, some perspective. Kerry, creating policies which prioritize people and the environment over profit, and then following through with the implementation or enforcement. Zakia, active citizenry and urban planning that considers people's inputs. Ashish, education and awareness about the use of sustainable cities. So utility point. Gwitse, affordable and accessible public transport where all are free from harassment. I wish buying a car as soon as one can afford it wasn't a thing because public transport builds community, but we're denied of that because it's simply unsafe for women, for example. Ryan adds partnerships. So thanks very much for the inputs, and do feel free to add a few more ideas in here. So I'd like to turn to our fabulous panel. We'll hear from people across planning, across organization of workers, across LGBTQ rights, activism, storytelling in media, climate scientists. But we're going to start off with an insight from the UN Economic Commission for Africa, who we invited to help contextualize what the current pressing challenges are and what is already happening to connect our cities into the AU Agenda 2063. So unfortunately, Lusungu Kiani, who's the Social Affairs Officer in Urbanization and Development, was unable to join and sent apologies, but very kindly sent us the contextualizing presentation. So I'm going to play that as a recording to set the basis and then invite discussion from our colleagues.
Hello, my name is Lusungu Kayani. It's truly an honor to speak at the opening of the Africa Rise Festival. This event is such a fantastic opportunity for us to reflect and ponder some of the unprecedented urban transformations taking place on the African continent. I was born in Tanzania. In the year I was born, the population of Dar es Salaam stood at less than 900,000 people. Just a few decades later, the population of Dar is more than 5.5 million people. This figure, interestingly enough, represents half of the country's entire population at the time of independence in 1963. A census was conducted in Tanzania last year, which indeed confirmed that Dar's urbanization rate is 5%, and the country's overall growth rate has been at more than 3% each year. In just less than a few decades, Dar, together with Lagos and Kinshasa, are poised to be some of the largest cities in the world. Now, these rates, as alarming as they may seem to some, are in fact representative of patterns of growth we are observing in other parts of the region. Not used to this crowd, I know, but Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent in the world. Cities in the region have grown by more than 4% per year, almost doubling their original population between the years of 2000 and 2015. By the year 2050, the current urban population is expected to triple what it is today and reach 1.5 billion city dwellers. However, African cities, as they are not well planned. They lack infrastructure to support this growth, and they're not able to provide basic services to their people. Cities and urbanization have largely been absent in national development planning, and there's a disconnect in national and spatial economic planning, which has led to fragmented policies in the region. This has resulted in inefficiencies and high costs of living and doing business. African cities are expensive to live in, and many people are paying more for transport, housing, and food when broadly compared to non-African cities. There are also enormous urban infrastructure deficits. Africans need to spend between $130 and $170 billion annually to meet the continent's basic infrastructure needs. Yet, the region is already facing financing shortfalls in the tens of billions of dollars. The lack of city planning and the urban infrastructure gap, combined with inefficient land use, are creating negative impacts on social, spatial, and environmental factors. The result is sprawl and informality, together with staggering unemployment. Now, this reality poses big challenges because Africa is young. 43% of the anticipated urban growth is made up of youth under the age of 14, which means Africa represents the world's youngest population as well. 1/3 of youth aged between 15 and 35 years are unemployed. 1/3 are working in vulnerable employment, and many others are engaged in wage labor. Informal work drives much of the economy. What's the result? Millions of urban dwellers who lack steady incomes and decent jobs that provide adequate social protections. The African Development Bank reports that each year, 10 to 12 million people enter the workforce, but there are only 3 million jobs, formal jobs, that come online. Moreover, there's a mismatch in the skills youth possess and those needed to sustain future job development on the continent. With the forecasted demographic trends, unemployment of Africa's youth is not just an African problem, but a global one. While overall poverty has decreased in the region, inequalities have increased, making Africa extremely vulnerable to shocks. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, 34% of Africans already lived below the poverty line. The pandemic is believed to have pushed a further 30 million people into extreme poverty. This amounts to 546 million people, or roughly half of the continent's total population, living in extreme poverty. Furthermore, with shocks resulting from the war in Ukraine and the global debt crisis, we risk losing some of the gains made in recent decades in human development and economic growth. As cities expand and new ones emerge, the demand on resources in the region will be significant and will have massive implications for achieving a sustainable future. The continent faces extreme environmental challenges. Africa's urban areas are likely to suffer disproportionately from climate change, as the region as a whole is warming up 1.5 times faster than the global average. The population combined with changing climate is resulting in land degradation, soil and biodiversity loss, and subsequent food insecurity. The strain on basic services and natural resources is set to increase. African cities are at risk of becoming both unlivable and financially strapped. But Africa is riddled with paradoxes. While this rapid growth presents mega challenges, there are massive opportunities for policymakers, development partners, and citizens in the region to ensure sustainable and inclusive urban development. The idiosyncrasies of Africa's development, particularly the challenges around informality and equitable access to services and improved quality of life, have yet to be addressed holistically. Urban policy and governance will be central tools to how we get there. Informed by Agenda 2063, which is Africa's blueprint for sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the recent Africa Union Green Recovery 5-year plan, we have substantial roadmaps to guide a people-driven and resilient development process that places cities at the center of not only national and global growth, but also regional development. The aspirations of Agenda 2063, particularly those focused on women and harnessing youth potential in employment, entrepreneurship, health and well-being, education and skills development, and SDG Goal 11 on human settlements acknowledge the importance of cities and offer pathways to implementing the new urban agenda. As we know, cities are the economic powerhouses of the region. 30% of all GDP is due to urbanization, demonstrating a strong link between economic growth and cities. From our research at ECA, we know that economically large cities are performing better than small cities, and small cities are performing better than rural areas. Recent spatial trends also show that 50% of rural residents live within 14 kilometers of a city, which highlights a phenomenon I like to call the rural-urban continuum rather than a divide, meaning that access to cities can mean more benefits for all. Generally speaking, urban residents are healthier, better educated, have improved access to electricity, water, mobile ownership, and are wealthier. Additionally, with the advent of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the free movement of goods and services can further spur economic growth and development through intra-African trade. Eliminating import duties and reducing non-tariff barriers has the potential of lifting millions of Africans out of poverty and boosting incomes by 2035. Simultaneously, Africa's exports may increase upwards of billions of dollars during this time. Most of this will be driven by manufacturing. In a recent urbanization study led by ECA, spatial patterns of urban growth have been mapped into 32 urban individual clusters. These clusters are significant as they're home to 60% of Africa's urban population. They provide systems of agglomeration economies and are home to customers, suppliers, investors, and infrastructure that is more robust than one large city. These city clusters will play a key role in value chain integration and the creation of competitive value chains and resilient supply chains in Africa. With cities at the center, local governments will be key actors in facilitating economic development, especially as you consider these clusters. While national governments have a role in coordination and setting the tone for development, local governments in the region have an enormous job as well. Investments in roads, schools, health facilities, waste management, water and sewerage networks will be required. And meeting of these changing dynamics will mean that continued fiscal and administrative decentralization will have to remain a priority for years to come. Now, I've thrown a number of figures at you, but one I hope you will remember is this. It is estimated that 70% of Africa's built environment that will exist in 2040 has yet to be constructed. The Africa region is at a pivotal point to leapfrog the design and environmental challenges from material consumption experienced elsewhere. Drawing upon circularity in the design of buildings and infrastructure will set Africa apart in the urban transition by not only encouraging traditional and indigenous techniques, but also promoting inclusivity, if done well. With 80% of the population growth living in cities, we are left with some critical choices going forward. Shifting our thinking and business as usual approach towards circular economy principles that promote locally sourced and constructed materials could reduce environmental degradation by addressing energy needs and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. We're at a crossroads. After much advocacy by urbanites such as yourselves at this festival, attention is finally being placed on urbanization in the region. The continent must plan accordingly to ensure that socioeconomic benefits are bestowed upon Africans, and that the opportunities of urbanization can lead to a just transition towards a sustainable economy and society that does not deepen poverty for the poor. Approaches to a just transition should take vertical as well as horizontal structures into account and should be contextualized within national and local place-based actions. The demographic dividend also presents us with enormous opportunities, if harnessed with the right policies and investments. Structural transformation, employment, and environmental sustainability can and should be addressed together. African decision makers must find creative ways to harness the demographic dividend to transform challenges into growth opportunities by better understanding the skills African industries require and the policies needed to address the skills mismatch. Furthermore, sustainable urban planning models that reflect climate change risks and spatial realities will need to be developed in a manner that promotes inclusivity. Given their critical role, local governments will need to be empowered to lead, incorporating a range of voices ranging from youth, women, and marginalized individuals, community-based organizations, to the private sector will be important and critical to the process. Innovative forms of research and knowledge that is co-led and produced with diverse stakeholders will lead to the design of inclusive and sustainable policies and actions for the cities we want to have. Thank you again for the time.
So I think that was an absolutely fabulous contextualization of a conversation where that's been happening for quite a while around urbanization. And I think to emphasize that point that we've arrived as advocates of the urban in a space where the world is acknowledging urbanization as a reality and the importance of engaging with it. But the questions about how we build the 60% of built environment that has yet to be built, how we harness the demographic dividends, are all conversations we want to get a bit deeper into. So with that, I'd like to invite Constance Kapp, who's an urban planner at the UN Environment Programme, to reflect in a way a bit about what has been said here on the connectivity and the clustering, but what is the role of megacities and these large agglomerations in providing continental aspirations and leadership around what the possibilities of cities can be. So really looking forward to your input and reflection. Your video cover is on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Sorry for the slight delay, and good morning, everyone. I'll just share my screen to start my short presentation. I believe we can all see the screen.
Yeah,
so I'll be fantastic. Yes, I'll be talking a bit about the role of the megacity in our continental aspirations and how good governance can address some of these urban pressures. By brief introduction, as was said, I'm an urban planner, and I do comment and write a bit about planning issues at African City Planner.com, currently working at the United Nations Environment Programme, and have a deep interest in sustainable mobility, metropolitan growth, and social justice, the role of social justice in planning of our cities. So just to think about the whole idea of the megacity and what it's about, okay, this term is normally used to describe highly populous areas and, with populations of over 10 million, extremely large urban areas with diverse economic, cultural, and political roles that they play, characterized also by human migration and rapid growth, sprawl, and urbanization. It's gained a lot of prominence over the last couple of years, especially because of a lot of rural-urban migration that's happening. We've seen a lot of megacity growth in Asia, Latin America, and we're beginning to see it on the African continent. And this tends to be linked also, another term we use is the metropolitan area. Okay, cities with a strong urban core, but with a lot of influence from the areas that. So you have your main city where the urban growth is, but the surrounding environments are also developing as urban areas. That entire area, and they may be in a different jurisdiction, okay, but they're still almost growing as one unit, growing widely as one particular unit. In Africa, we have three main megacities, at least at the moment, and this is Cairo, Kinshasa, and Lagos. We know Lagos with over 14 million people. We have Cairo, 20 million. Kinshasa, we're talking another 14 or so million people, and these are all, economic centers, industrial centers with rich cultural and political roles that they play. But they also face, some of the unique challenges that we see in many other African cities: formality, growing population, a lot of rural linkages, the big problem of urban inequalities that we see in many of our cities. There's also a lot of influence from external investors and influence from development partners who also play a big role in how infrastructure is driven within a lot of these cities. However, also as we are moving, we have projected trends within the continent. Okay, it's said that by 2050 we may have a few more megacities, a few more metropolitan urban zones. We are talking of Dar es Salaam, we are talking of Nairobi, Khartoum, possibly Luanda, and a few more. And we could see places like the growth of Dar es Salaam growing by possibly 118%, from 7.5 million to 16.4 million. Same with Nairobi, by almost 100%, from current 5.2 million to 10.4, and same with Kinshasa and Lagos, which are also going to expand. And a unique aspect with all of this is that they tend to be also primate cities. And primate cities, for those of us who are new to this term, is where you have one particular big city in a country, and the country is very highly dependent on that particular city, which is unlike some of the cities in the global north, where you have multiple metropolitan areas. You take an example, the United States, where you'll be talking about on one side New York, and then you have LA on the other side, you have Boston, or even Germany, where you'll be talking about Berlin, you'll be talking about Munich, you'll be talking about other cities, Dortmund, etc. Different multiple big cities that have different levels of influence. In our scenario, we're looking mainly at big cities within that particular one big city within that particular urban group. Of course, these are very important. These cities contribute a lot to the GDP, and of course they end up being focus point for national governments. Okay, a success for a metropolitan area can even pose as a political threat for a national government in the cases where you have maybe different political parties running the program in the metropolitan area versus the country itself. And that could be seen as a bit of a threat. Okay, and whereas they also have to be seen from a positive side. They offer a lot of employment opportunities. They offer diverse social networks, access to services that you don't find in many of the smaller towns and many of the rural areas. But they also bring a number of challenges, and there's a strain on infrastructure. And in Africa, we've seen this necessity to catch up: traffic congestion, housing shortages, environmental pollution, social inequality, some of the things we've talked about. But efforts are being put to look at the ways in which we can adapt and handle and deal with some of these areas. So when it comes to governance, we realize that governance is like the top of a three-legged stool, because you have three major factors in what we call the metropolitan genoma. The three major factors that come in, economic, social, and physical environment, economic prosperity, social equity, and the development of the physical environment. Okay? But it is very important that all these are covered by governance, and that's why the role of governance becomes very important. It's not a simple thing. We have to think about who is governing the urban, who is governing the surrounding. We avoid fragmentation of services? How do we avoid negative spillovers across jurisdictions? How do we capitalize on economies of scale across the different jurisdictions within these metropolitan areas? And, as you see from the genoma, there is a built environment that covers physical environment that aims at bring sustainable development. We also want to bring economic efficiency, but at the same time with a balance of social equity. And it's through this aspect of governance and taking into consideration the three aspects of the genoma, the metropolitan genoma, that we can be able to capitalize on this megacity and diverse urban growth. And there are different structures that we need to look at. There are different ways in which we can capitalize, make use there. We need to think about mass transit, strategic planning, solid waste disposal. How do we bring in the democratic, inclusive, and participatory modes of planning into the growth of these metropolitan areas? Urban areas require all these services. They also need business support. They also need to recognize environmental and sector, the health sector, the transport sector. But how do we bring all those together? And this is an area that we cannot give an easy black and white solution. We need to look at specific situations in different countries based on governance structures. But there are some schools of thought or some lessons that we can learn from different sectors. We can look at, what areas can we address jointly in the entire metropolitan area, and then what areas can we touch locally, so as to ensure that we have that participatory approach, and what areas can we touch the entire metropolitan area so as to capitalize on economies of scale from the different jurisdictions. So in something like strategic planning, we could look at planning at a regional scale, and that can be done by joint metropolitan areas and different jurisdictions coming together. But implementation of local plans can be done at the local scale. In land use management, we can look at structural land use plans being done at a much bigger scale. But talking about local plans, building permits and enforcement, that can be done at a local scale, even to the point of neighborhood level. Okay. In the transport system, mass transit systems are better done, capitalizing on economies of scale, linking the different urban areas that are forming this metropolitan area, BRT systems, light rail systems. But at a local scale, we can also look at permits, permits for taxis, for buses, for parking. That can be done at a local scale. Solid waste management, collection is better done at a local scale, neighborhood or ward level, whereas, overall solid waste management, planning and disposal is better done jointly, capitalizing on these economies of scale. And the same goes for an environment, where we can look at mobilization of harmonized rules at a much bigger scale, but implementation at a local scale. And health as well, prevention and mitigation policies are a much bigger role, but enforcement of the policies is done at a local scale. And there are many examples we can learn from, when we ask ourselves what direction. Well, we can take in some countries, in the US and France, they developed what they call the intermunicipal forum, creating an authority that looks at brings together the different municipalities to take up different roles. In Vancouver, in London, they have a metropolitan authority that's sectoral or multi-sectoral, depending on different sectors within that urban area. Or you also have two-tier metropolitan governance, which is practiced in Hungary, Budapest, and some Chinese cities, where you have some roles being done by metropolitan government and others being done by a a government at a lower scale, or a completely separate entity for the metropolitan area. I know this was tried recently in Nairobi as almost an intervention, but it's been done in Tokyo, where you have a complete separate entity that can either be elected or appointed. And we also have consolidated local governments in some places like Tokyo, Toronto, Istanbul, and I think some South African cities. And
Constance, can you wrap in 30 seconds or a minute?
In some places, regional government. So, unique models have to be taken into account, and or even taking into consideration planning at a regional scale, like the Regional Planning Association in North America. Is there a final a black and white way of governing our metropolitan areas? No, it's something we need to look into. We cannot say that in Africa we've really investigated and come up with solutions, but it's something we can learn from others and continue to attempt different approaches such that we can be able to tackle all the challenges that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really great insight into some routes to take these rather large, terrifying processes of urbanization in large cities and to break them down into smaller pieces for governance, or to look at how you integrate them better. So I have a few questions emerging there, which I think would be great for follow-up. So we've spoken so far about urbanization as the megatrend that is causing a lot of challenges and offering a lot of opportunities. So I think it's really important in the context of African development to bring in the other megatrend that is causing a lot of threats and challenges and poses a really strong risk for our future. And that's that, of course, of climate crisis. So I'd like to invite Karine Buma, Senior Specialist for Climate Change, Energy and Resilience at ICLEI Africa, to share some insights around what the climate crisis means for our cities and how it's impacting their potential plans for the future. Go ahead, Karine.
Sure. Thanks so much, Paul. I think the trends of urbanization and the impacts have already been really emphasized by the previous panelists. And just to add to that, in addition to people moving into the urban areas and cities for better opportunities for in search for greener pastures, this is leading to a growth of the informal sector in these cities. I mean, at least 56% of African cities are now informal, and also about 65% of the workforce in Africa is in the informal sector. We find a lot of people doing the hairdressing, working in open spaces that are more exposed to heat stress and rainfall and all of that. And as a result of these high exposures to the hazards of climate change, the rainfalls, high temperatures, sandstorms, informal settlements are the most vulnerable to this. They make up the majority of the urban population, and they don't have the necessary resources to adapt to potential impacts of climate change. This includes flooding, heat stress, drought, and they have also poor access to resources within these communities. Hence, the local and national governments in these African cities are not only trying to address the challenges of urbanization, providing the necessary resources, but they are also at the same time made by trying to address these climate shocks that are constantly faced by the African cities. As it is already known, Africa contributes very little to GHG emissions. I think the most recent report reports less than 9% contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but the African continent itself, and particularly its cities and the informal sector in these cities are paying the highest price. They are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. The hazards are more frequent now due to high vulnerability and high exposure of these communities. And talking about the urban poor again, we have cities in Africa. I think in Freetown, for example, there are about 70 informal settlements in Freetown only, which are faced by heat stresses, the flooding, the landslides that occurred that killed so many people in recent years. I think thousands of people lost their lives as a result of that. So these are already the impacts that are currently being faced by African cities when it comes to climate change impacts, and these are projected to increase. And as mentioned, the factors of vulnerability and exposure affect the type of hazards that are affecting, or the degree, intensity of impact differently across cities. So in other cities, there is high trends of drought, talking especially when it comes to the southern area or the southern region of the African continent, where there is unavailability or scarcity of water resources, like in Zimbabwe, for instance. And then when you look at West Africa, the Nigeria, the Gulf of Guinea, there is then more of flooding, which is having huge impacts also on infrastructure, the livelihoods of the people. And again, this is always worse for urban and informal settlements, who do not have the necessary resources to adapt to such impacts. There are also the sandstorms in the northern region, like Libya, Algeria, Egypt, which is also getting into the cities, affecting the airports, leading to some airports even closing as a result of these impacts being faced in the cities. So in a nutshell, the climate change is already affecting the African cities, and it is affecting them in different sectors. When you look at the agricultural sector, for instance, most of Africa, I think over 65% of the workforce in Africa is employed by the agricultural sector. And the fact that over 95% or so of this agriculture is dependent on rainfall or rain-fed agriculture, this poses a huge, this exposes the agricultural sector or the food supply or even employment sector to this unpredictable rainfall patterns and the agricultural produce. And then this also has a toll on the food security of the region, where most of it is dependent on such rain-fed agricultural practices. In addition, also, there is the issue of the health impacts when it comes to climate change. This is already affecting the region also. So the unpredictable rainfall patterns, heavy rainfalls, the droughts is increasing the prevalence of diseases, and I think in 2017, the total death caused by malaria, about 93% of that was only contributed by the African region. So 93% of all global malaria deaths occurred in Africa as a result of these unpredictable rainfall patterns and the drought that caused the malaria causing mosquitoes to prevail in the continent. And then some of the other impacts also that are already being felt in the region is that of the economy is grossly affected by this climate change. So we already spoke about the agricultural sector that is affected grossly, but it's also been predicted in a recent report that was published that an increase in temperatures of about 4 degrees, between 1 to 5, or between 2 degrees and 4 degrees would lead to a reduction in the gross domestic product of the African region by about 12%. This is quite massive when you think about the existing struggles and the existing impacts already being faced, both by climate change, but also other the cities and the national and local governments trying to keep up with the urbanization rates in Africa and the predicted increase in the informal sector of the region and all of the surrounding impacts. But nonetheless, the African cities and African national governments have come to realization that the climate change is happening. They are already planning for this. And when it comes to the NDCs, most African countries have already committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and also adapting to the impacts of climate change. I think about 50 or so countries are committed. And what they are doing is, in addition to reducing these greenhouse gas emissions, they are putting in more efforts now to put in the necessary infrastructure that would enable them adapt to
qui leur permettra
future or even current impacts of climate change within the cities, which is quite great. And they are also involving the local governments as much as possible. So planning from a bottom-up approach and also trying to make it as inclusive as possible, even though it's not sufficient, because most often the informal sector that is most affected are not included in these plans, which speaks to what needs to be done. But there is good work already being done in most of the cities to plan from the bottom up across multiple sectors to address some of these issues, and also to an extent decentralize the physical and also the technical and capacity building aspects to these local communities, the local governments, to help them plan adequately to address the impacts of climate change. In a nutshell, in summary, we are already impacted by climate change. We are trying, the cities are trying to address this, the local governments are trying to address this, but there is also an opportunity for us then to build better, to build more climate-proof infrastructure, energy efficient buildings that will consume less, and also provide sources of employment to the youth and the rest of the urban population, which is mostly unemployed or employed only in the informal sector. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Corinne, for providing some further context. I think what you framed there is very clearly that climate is a crisis multiplier. So, you know, if there's a difficult trajectory in many respects, climate is going to make it worse. But I think that point that there's acceptance around climate and there are moves to adapt or to invest in reducing its impacts, I think is really important. But again, just like the urbanization conversation, that's seeing action on the ground is important. So I want to come back to you if you might have some examples around interesting policies or approaches that cities are taking. I'd like to invite Vanessa Pillay, who's the Organization and Representation Program Coordinator in Africa at WeGo, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, to reflect on some of the themes that we've heard already, particularly from you in chat about the need to focus on informal sector, as well as the fact that the majority of people in cities are connected to participating dependent upon informal homes and economies. So welcome, Vanessa. I think the question we framed initially was what informal strategies are residents in African cities already employing as they respond to challenges and seize opportunities? It'd be great to have your reflections.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the rest of ICLE and RISE Africa for the invitation and the opportunity to contribute to this very important conversation. Just a little bit more information about WeGo before I respond to the question. So WeGo is a global network, which stands for Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. As a global network, WeGo is focused on supporting the struggles of workers in informal employment, especially women, to secure their livelihoods. And this means that in all of the different descriptions that we've already heard on the panel thus far, that all workers should have equal economic opportunities, should have their rights respected and protected, should have social protection, and should have a voice. And I want to respond to the question around the strategies that workers in the informal employment are taking to secure their livelihoods. It's important to mention that in most of our cities, both policies and practices tend to be exclusive, tend to be punitive, tend to stigmatize informality, which means that and I don't want to get this wrong, looking at those exclusive and exclusionary and punitive policies and practices, in terms of workers in informal employment, it means that 89% of the total workforce of sub-Saharan Africa are subjected to evictions, to harassment, to a lack of adequate services and infrastructure for their residential use, as well as their livelihood needs. So within that context, the most important strategy for workers in informal employment is to be able to be at the negotiation table, where policies and regulations are negotiated, discussed, where decisions are made about their living as well as their working conditions. So a key strategy has been amongst workers in the informal employment, especially those who work in public spaces. I will talk later on in the conversation about the other categories of workers in informal employment. But at this point, for those working in public spaces and the ones that are more obvious in the sectors that we support as street vendors, for those category of workers, it is important to be at the negotiation table where, like I said, regulations, policies, decisions are made that affect their lives and their livelihoods. Examples of those strategies, I'll go back a little bit further and then cite a more recent example. And the first example I want to start with is the one of the Federation of Petty Traders and Informal Workers Union of Liberia, FEPTIWUL, that negotiated 2 rounds of memorandum of understanding with the city of Monrovia to help manage public space, but also to try and eradicate the constant harassment. And it was at the initiative of FEPTIWUL that these memorandum of understanding were concluded. In the first round of negotiations, the organization realized that the city officials and the city authorities actually were not that great negotiators. So they took a further step and initiated capacity building, joint capacity building. That was unheard of, that the traders said, come, city officials, let's invite our people. In fact, one of the facilitators of that capacity building is in the audience today, Pat Horn, to facilitate capacity building for the traders as well as the city authorities to sit together to negotiate this memorandum of understanding so that they could work and live together and make decisions together about their livelihood. So that's one strategy. Another one more recently that I'd like to cite, another example that I'd like to cite is the example of the platform of actions of actors in the informal sector, PASI, in Dakar, Senegal. As we know, Senegal, Dakar, the city of Dakar is going through a whole project of modernization. And so PASI, which is a collective of traders who are affected and severely affected by these modernization projects, because what it means for them is eviction. Get rid of 89% of the total workforce to modernize a city. And so PASI, late in 2022, PASI initiated a dialogue with authorities. The mayor attended that dialogue. And one of the outcomes was that the National Urban Planning Agency staff had not included, they recognize now that they had not included the traders or those most affected in the consultations around the modernization plan. So the outcome of that engagement or that dialogue was that the newer version of the modernization plan could now be shared with the traders. The point I'd like to make, though, is that, you know, recognizing that an important stakeholder had been left out. Now committing to sharing a predetermined plan. That's an afterthought. We say include key stakeholders right from the outset. Nothing about workers in the informal employment without workers in the informal employment. It's bizarre that a city can plan and claim that they forgot to include or consult such an important stakeholder, yet they knew that this is going to be a potential nuisance that must now be evicted as we modernize. So what can we learn from these two examples? Is that at 89% of the total workforce, workers in informal employment, especially women, sustain households, as we've already heard, They sustain communities and economies at all levels. They provide the necessary goods and services at affordable prices and from accessible spaces in working class communities, at transport hubs, near offices, yet they continue to be considered a nuisance as African cities clean up and modernize. How do we better support these strategies for inclusion, mostly inclusion at the negotiation table where policy decisions are made? We say we can recognize the workers and the important work that they are doing, respect their organizations and include them right from the beginning in city plans and designs, both as residents and as economic agents. And rather than these ad hoc consultations or these ad hoc conversations that city authorities tend to have with workers in informal employment, we call for institutionalized negotiation forums. And we have seen where they have existed, as I've said, in the example of Monrovia, in smaller examples, for example, in Zimbabwe, across 20 towns, the Zimbabwean Organization of Workers in Informal Employment, ZACHIA, has signed memorandum of understanding with authorities in 20 small towns. So institutionalized negotiation forums instead of ad hoc engagement, provide basic infrastructure such as water and toilets. You would think that that would be obvious, but it's not. And also work-related infrastructure such as shelter and storage space is critical to support and secure informal livelihoods. And not only in public spaces, but also in residential areas within cities, because for many workers, again, in the informal employment, their homes also double up as their workplaces, and we can come back to that later in the conversation. And lastly, just by way of how to support the strategies for inclusion, is that when you look at cities that are often resource-strapped, it boggles the mind that the human and financial resources that are used to exercise evictions, and often really violent evictions. And I think if those resources could be put to better use to make sure that we have inclusive systems, we have systems that address the structural inequalities stemming from decisions that tend to be focused on profit and the private sector rather than people-centered approaches and policy initiative. Eviction is not getting rid, it's moving work from one place to another, which is most likely bound to spring up again in another space. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Vanessa. It's really exciting. I think you've captured an argument with core examples about what the possibilities are. And I think what you framed there, 2 points. Slum eradication is slum creation. To your point, people will be sleeping somewhere that evening. So it isn't an answer as a direct solution anyway. But these two cities, the planned city, the modern city, the clean city that doesn't really take cognizance of how the city actually works and who's actually in it, working in it and providing the support. So I think thank you for beautifully contextualizing that. And I think the stream through the panelists thus far that we've sort of seen are these questions about top-down control or design of a city versus some bottom-up strategies. And I'm hoping in the conversations we're coming a bit closer to what are some of the ideas for how we bridge those. So I think 3 really nice examples already in here. So I'd like to invite our next speaker to take the conversation perhaps on vulnerability a little bit further as well. We have spoken about making space for vulnerable people, including them in the decision-making processes, but also some of the themes from the last discussion at the last festival was vulnerability as an opportunity for solidarity. and an opportunity for joy. So I'd like to invite Matthew Blaze to join us and reflect a little bit on the work that you're doing as an LGBTQ plus rights activist and a youth activist, and describe some of the how your work intersects with urbanization and participatory governance.
Thank you so much, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, coming through perfectly.
Awesome. So I would just ask the question, who belongs to a city? And I just want us to step back and think about that for a bit. Who belongs to a city? These cities we are creating, who is meant to occupy them? So in various African countries and also cities, there's a conversation about who belongs and who does not belong. And in this conversation, you see how some of us have been divided, especially people who do not possess the same gender identity and sexual orientation as others. For instance, there's the conversation in Uganda about further criminalization of LGBTQ people. There is the conversation in Ghana too, and also in Nigeria, there are laws that exist in this space. And most of the arguments around this legislating are often that queer people do not belong to this society, and we are a product of westernization. So what does that mean to cities? What does that mean to us? Since we talk about inclusion, we talk about diversity, what does it mean to be inclusive? Whenever Africans talk about the topic inclusion, there's always a one-way approach to that, which is including women and also people of diverse religions. And we are not really getting into some of the issues that that we actually have to face, that LGBTQ people in the society, they exist and they can't go anywhere. So since we are all in the city and we are all people who occupy the city, how do we live, how do we coexist in the city? And it's so sad to know that instead of talking about progressive ways in which we can coexist in this space, we are so much focused on the divide. And you see, that's why you see conversation in Parliament about further criminalization of LGBTQ people. And it just makes, it just creates this environment where we can't actually, it creates this environment where we think we can't actualize the ideal city that we want, a city that is free from discrimination. And what is a city if there's the human rights violation steadily happening? Is it about the structures of the city, the buildings, the institutions, or the people? And the people give the city the life they deserve. And if the people do not exist in these cities are not cities. And if we think some people who identify as LGBTQ do not deserve this city, then I do not think we are ready to have cities, because this city is a combination of different characteristics of different people from different places. And there's also, for instance, in Lagos is a fast-growing city, estimated at 21 million population. And this Lagos is the home of people from different parts of the country in Nigeria. and also different parts of the world who are struggling to be accepted in their different homes. Lagos is not an ideal city for people who are diverse in their ways of life, right? But it provides you a space where you can get support at least, which is very, very important in everything we do. And how do we talk about city development when the people who develop these cities are not acknowledged? How do we build a city without our full potentials? This is the reality of LGBTQ people who have so much to offer to a city and its development, but they are always being denied of this contribution to this society, to this culture, because we are assumed to be foreign entities in this space, and we are treated as aliens. So this leads us to how safe spaces are created, even in these cities that we imagine. How do we create safe spaces for people who are rejected, people who are unable to actualize their full potentials in this space? So what we try to do with our organization, which is called Obodo, is to create safe spaces for LGBTQ people in Lagos, and just give them that space to be, because the city is very, very stressful for everyone. And the least we can do is to not be hostile and not be violent to one another. Well, this is the sad reality that we experience. The rate of discrimination which LGBTQ people face keeps increasing every day. There is violence from state and non-state bodies. For instance, in Nigeria, there are up to 9 laws that criminalizes LGBTQ people. And it's so sad that every attempt to repeal this law has not been every attempt to repeal this law has not been helpful at all. And I mean, there's somebody quoting a part of the Bible for me. Yeah, I hope you take care of yourself. You need Jesus yourself. And yeah, so it's so sad that we face this amount of discrimination every day in our different societies.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt, Matthew. I just have to say that this virtual platform here is a safe space, and we're creating space for people to express different perspectives. I'd very much like to request you don't call someone who's joining and offering their perspectives an abomination. So if there's another call in there, we're going to remove you. This is not part of the ethos of this space. We understand you have your own beliefs, but it is not human to cast those upon someone else, particularly in this open space. Matthew, please proceed.
Yeah, so in creating these spaces, it's so sad that when activists advocate for a better society, they are not listened to, but their requests are met with more violence. So how do we as private individuals, as organizations help LGBTQ people and also be good allies to them? How do we encourage diversity and create a good work environment in our various little societies, in our various little organizations, in our own families? How do we try to change this perception about LGBTQ people? Because at the end of it, these cities belong to us also. And we can't go anywhere. We can't go anywhere. This is our home, and we also have to stay here. So it's very, very important that we in the civil society spaces are able to create safe spaces and partner with LGBTQ organizations, be good allies to them, and be in spaces where they might not have access to due to this, to their sexual orientation and various gender identities. In Africa currently, the violence against LGBTQ people is increasing rapidly, and we all cannot just stay quiet about it. We have to speak up. We have to create spaces for people in this community, and we have to create spaces for people in this community, and we have to further collaborate and partner to create a more inclusive and diverse society.
Thank you, Matthew, for sharing. And I think to segue from the previous conversation where you're criminalized as an informal vendor for what you are doing, whereas what we're talking about here is being criminalized for who you are. And I think that's something more pervasive and difficult to change, as it's a cultural shift, as we've seen in this very call. We have very strong feelings that need to be engaged. So thank you for sharing. We have one more input from our panelists. We're running a teeny bit late, and I do want some space for conversation at the end. So I'd like to invite Nazreen Alamin, who's the founder and executive director of Surge Africa, our colleague here, to reflect on why storytelling is vital for driving a just transition in African cities. And I think part of the reason we create spaces like this is for people to share their stories and ideally inspire people. So Nazreen, I'd love you to reflect on the role of storytelling in this space.
Thank you, Paul. And I hope everyone can forgive me because I'm having a very, very bad internet. I've fell up and come back over 10 times. So I'm so sorry if that happens. So thank you for having me here. And it's been quite a morning with lots of insights flowing around. So I do have a series of questions that I want to start with, and I would like it to be very, very participatory, but I have no idea which approach would be best. So I'm going to maybe type. Is it okay if I type the question in the chat and then maybe, or you can just give a thumbs up or thumbs down if you feel it's a yes or no. And also I'll try to speak as slow as possible, just in case some people find it hard to understand my accent. So the first question is, are our cities going green, or is it our homes that are going green? So I'll type it in the chat, just paste it there. So, but you can just, give a thumbs up or thumbs down to indicate yes or no. You just really type the answer in the chat. And you only have 10 seconds to do this because I have 4 minutes. So please, if you would like to contribute to this. Okay, great. Okay, so the next question is, oh my God, homes. Great. So the next question is, if our homes are going green, does that mean cities are? Because remember, our homes are, situated in our cities. So could that also be, it's our cities that are going green, or are we going to segment our homes from our cities and leave the city as this broad space, maybe the industrial sector or maybe the business sector, but then our homes become also this individual space? Okay, yes, not really. No, great. Homes are going green because our city citizens are feeling, so it's, yeah, that's very true, great. And I wanted to ask the next question, which is, how many of us know people whose homes have renewable energies? But it seems like, I don't know if I should, but you can just give a thumbs up for this because I haven't seen anyone use that. So maybe this is a good chance for you to use all the emoticons and the reaction. So how many of us here know people whose homes have renewable energies? And I think solar would be the most popular. Great. I should also add mine. Pat, I'm surprised that you don't know anyone. I'm surprised and a bit disappointed because you should be that person, Pat, but okay, we'll get to that. Yeah, and the last question is, with all these talks about people and homes, having, solar or having renewable energies, do you think it's because of, one, advocacy of the climate sector, second, government policies and incentives, and the third, self-interest driven by accessibility or affordability of, this energy? I'm also going to type it here. Okay, just give me a second. Okay, so do you think it's because of advocacy of the climate sector, government incentives, and self-interest? So combination of all, but mostly self-interest. I also think it's self-interest. So that means communicators within the sector and advocates, you guys are not doing enough. So much of self-interest. Self-interest and greed. Solar energy is more expensive. It's true, and I'm going to also make emphasis on that. It's so expensive, but so many people still install it. So why is that? So anyways, I do have a few minutes to talk about this, but I just want to say that this is really me most of the time, just blabbing about things that I think about. And I would love if we can have a very interactive discussion after this. So it's mostly just, as Paul put it, self-reflection. So I do hope you would indulge me, but very, very impressive responses, and we're going to get back to this. But I just really want to say that I often ask myself this question because I work actually at the intersections of so many things, climate communications, policy, energy transition, adaptation, resilience. So I work around lots of other things, but more specifically, when I look at, campaigning and communications, I usually ask myself, like, do we ever imagine what people outside of this sector think about the energy transition? And in some honest moments, I do ask myself if people outside of this sector actually know and understand what we are advocating for. Because the truth is that I do go to the field a lot, and I do engage with so many other people outside of this sector. And you just find out that it's much different, when you engage with people outside of people within the sector. So, but more importantly, I think that the question is, do we as communicators or advocates ever think about whether the information, data, and campaigns we put up there actually lands with the people? Because most of the time, advocacy and campaigns seems to only be targeted at people within the sector. So there is really a huge gap between, where we are and where we need to be. And so, which is why, using storytelling to drive discussions around energy transition, energy access can be difficult. I mean, it's not impossible, and it can be interesting at times, but there needs to be an alignment between, people's struggles, between local struggles and the transition itself for storytelling or strategic communications to play its part. And, well, we do have issues around energy poverty and energy access, which has a huge impact on our industry, transportation systems, and our economics at large. But what matters is making these issues relatable to a local person, a potential beneficiary of these systems or services, or even, a beneficiary of a system that he might not necessarily have trust in, because we know that so many of us don't really have trust in our political systems. So, but how do we make these issues about energy relatable in terms of how it affects, our social lives, whether it's access to stable, energy source or transportation, or, how transactions are carried out? So just to go back to the little quiz that we had earlier on about the use of alternative energy sources, and the last bit, which was really about, renewable energy, specifically solar, and, that it is mostly used at home. And someone mentioned, the reason that solar is more expensive. So the reason homes are going green, I think it's really about accessibility, because solar and other renewable energies are actually not affordable. I mean, it depends on which type of energy you're using, but if you're looking to power your home and not trying to use solar bulb, then it's certainly not cheap. And, I'll make emphasis with a personal experience. we are doing this large-scale restoration project at Surge, where we're trying to restore 500 hectares of land. And we have this particular site which has 6 hectares. So, but it needs water, and we needed to power the borehole with solar panels, with solar power. And it's really just 6 hectares of bare land that we're trying to restore. A couple of thousand trees there with just really one building, just one single building that we're trying to build a seed bank. So maybe the light and the bulb, maybe like 5, and then, you know, you have the borehole and it needs that energy. It needs the solar to power it. But we spent close to $5,000. And I'm telling you, this is not one of those inflated projects where, you know, because it's an NGO, you get to inflate the budget. It's really not like that. It is that expensive. So imagine bare land just to power borehole that would give water with just one single room seed bank, and you spend close to $5,000. So it's really not affordable. That is the truth. It's not affordable, but it is accessible. And you know, I'm just trying to say that if there is a growing interest in adopting new energies among our societies that is not driven by affordability or advocacy from the climate sector or government policies and incentives, then what is driving it? And I really thought about it, and I thought it's definitely classism, but we're not going to get into that today.
Nazreen, can you wrap so we can go into some chats with our panel?
Yeah. I'm about to, just give me a second. So we're not going to get into that today, but the point I'm trying to make is that, can communication and storytelling play a role in driving policy change that incentivize this energy source, making it more affordable? And the point is, yes, it can. And I'm so sorry, just give me a minute. I just want to say this thing about this story that happened in Kano. So that's my hometown. So Kano hosts the largest solar hybrid power plants in the world. So the power was too much for the university that it can be able to also power neighboring communities. And, you know, the school knows that, the government knows that, but there wasn't really any interest to extend this to the community until one student actually wrote a story about how, you know, this power can be incentivized so that community members can actually have access to it. And then a member of that community actually took this story up to take it to the leaders of the community. And then they had to reach out to the school to say that we actually need this resourcing, and now they're in talks of, you know, how they can be able to extend this huge power potential to be harnessed to those neighboring communities. So there is power in storytelling. It just depends on how we use it, how we make it relatable, and who the audience are for that specific story. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nazreen. And on this note, first, would like to say thank you very much to all speakers. My apologies, Paul had to quickly leave. He'll be back shortly. And just by way of introduction, my name is Funmi Adeniyi, and I'm also with ICLEI Africa. And it's been really great to listen to all of the entries from the various speakers and the various viewpoints with regards to the cities that we currently have and that process in driving towards the cities that we want. On this note, I'm going to hand back to Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Funmi, for covering. Had to just jump out briefly. So again, to support with a thank you, we're coming up towards our prescribed end of the session, which is quite telling given that we crammed it full of really interesting insights. But I do want to create space for people to offer a closing reflection on what they've heard. What has been interesting to me, again, is that tension between top-down and bottom-up practices to making our city. And these assets already exist within the cities that we have. So can I ask all of our panelists to turn on your videos, and we do one more round just to reflect on a few questions. If any of our participants have any questions they would like answered, please throw them into the chat, and I ask our panelists to respond in the chat as well. So perhaps to start us off, Constant, you've been listening through, you've mentioned the word participatory planning. Vanessa has suggested we use that word loosely, but we really have to mean it. Can you reflect a little bit on the power of planning and what you would propose, particularly for these really big systems of cities? How do we effectively do participatory planning? If you could have a short reflection on that, and I think then we'll go around.
Hey, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I think it has to be looked at from different scales. Obviously, there are things that you want to get done at a very local scale, especially when you're dealing with we've talked about informality, we've talked about markets and neighborhood kind of engagements, and that requires sitting down and understanding the social cultural characteristics of the particular people you're planning with. Cuts across all the conversations that have been had, and then there's obviously the much larger scale where you're talking of much bigger sectors being looked into, transport, solid waste management, health, and there you have to sit also have an understanding with the bigger players, because there's a need to understand the user perspective. There's also a need to understand which is the normal citizen, but also understanding who are the other players within that sector. And in many cases, in our cities, a lot of these areas have been captured by you can call them entrepreneurs because of lack of social services within depletion of social services. So looking at it from different scales and not necessarily always just assuming solutions within the particular scale, the particular place.
Thanks so much, Constant. And I see a great question in which I think each of our panelists could reflect on. Does the traditional definition of cities work in our dynamic, rapidly urbanizing contexts? So do respond in. I'm going to ask Corinne just to reflect again on specific examples where cities are taking a lead in climate action and who we could learn from. So Vanessa gave us some great strategies around incorporating informal vendors into negotiating. Do we have examples where cities have done effective climate planning or action?
Thanks, Paul. So one of the cities and one of the countries where so much work has been done at the local level is in Kenya. So in Kenya, there is a national planning framework where they've tried to devolve functions, especially around climate planning, climate action planning and implementation. And cities or counties, which is the case, are expected to develop and implement climate action plans. And many counties in Kenya are already doing this, namely Kisumu County, Nakuru County, which is where our ICLEI Africa, through some of our projects, have done some work. And there's a good example of Nakuru County where, besides developing these inclusive participatory climate action plans, they have also taken it a step further and set up a climate action fund where a certain percentage of their county budget goes towards climate action plans. And this has also created a forum, one opportunity for the county to receive funding both from the national government, but also from international funders to fund and implement climate related projects within the county. And they're really doing great, and they keep looking for opportunities to maximize this as much as possible. You have other cities as well that are still struggling. They don't have the necessary capacity. I'm thinking of cities in Sierra Leone, for instance, where they don't necessarily have the devolved functions to plan or implement climate or energy projects. And they are still taking the initiative with the limited mandate that they have to plan and implement climate-related projects. An example is the clean cooking sector, which is often, not very vocal or not really mentioned or not really planned for in African cities when they talk about energy. But some cities still are also taking the initiative through their maybe tree planting initiative to sensitize communities around the disadvantages of using tree for cooking, and also then driving the importance of clean cooking. So many African cities are really taking the lead in this.
Thanks so much. And I think the point about assigning a percentage of budget towards certain things, I think we've got a lot of plans that then do not connect to resourcing. Similarly, the devolution and decentralization strategies, many of them have politically devolved responsibilities from national government to local, but without the resources. So I think that's nice to see some money put towards climate plans. Vanessa, you've reflected on a few cases where informal worker organizers had engaged local government with MOUs and had organized in there. What is your perception about that type of work in shifting the culture of understanding of the role of informal in our cities? I know that a number of people we speak to, it's a question, how do we deal with this? Not how do we invest in or engage with people who are helping to build the city. Do you have some reflections on how these types of interactions start to actually change the narrative of what the modern city or what the African city should be?
There's so much to say about that, Paul, and I wanted to highlight some myths and facts about informality, but I don't think our time allows for that. So I'll just share the PowerPoint presentation so that it can go into the records for that. But in response to your question just now, I think that, as we know, urban planning is about determining access to infrastructure as well as economic opportunities. And so in my view, it could be either, it spreads from across the spectrum from being supportive and recognizing informal livelihoods, or completely ignoring them as if they don't exist. And in our African context, that is crazy because it's just so populous, it's there, you cannot ignore it, but it can be neglected, consciously neglected in planning, or even undermined. And we see that in so many instances. There are so many examples across the region. I spoke about evictions, and there's a pattern in evictions. They tend to escalate when we are not around periods of political elections, and then they tend to decrease depending again on the situation in the country when they want the vote of the masses, and then so that's the pattern. So for me, that kind of pattern speaks volumes of a lack of political will for true integration, true recognition. So from the one end of being supportive, ignoring, undermining, to completely destroying informal livelihoods. That's the reality. That's the reality we see in our current policy framework. That's the reality in our practices. And so unless and until that reality is being addressed deeply, and I think, let's make no mistake that these urban planning processes they presented as technical, but we know that they are deeply political and deeply contested processes. So if you really want to be inclusive, then that shift has to take place. And it has to be inclusive of everybody who lives and works in the spaces that we're talking about.
Thank you so much. I love that spectrum from this evictions to vote seeking, and engaging that. Matthew, can I ask for a 3-minute reflection? You've mentioned that your work is about creating safe space in cities. And I think there are a number of people who are aiming to do that around a number of different communities and needs. What is your experience in doing that? How does it work best to set up these types of spaces?
Thank you so much, Paul. I would say organizing in a city where it's criminal to do your kind of work is very difficult and also life-threatening. So you have to navigate the space in a way where you don't have to be caught by the state government, and that is establishing underground spaces where people can actually just find safety. So how I navigate that is so much by working with allies who also have the interests of the communities at hand. And we set up these spaces together by collaborating and getting our resources together as a collective. And I think that is very, very important in this kind of work. It's very, very crucial that you work as a collective. And also, so how I navigate my work is to reach out to people who have more resources than I do, and also put in mind the security implications of what I am doing, and use that as a guiding factor on how, when, and where I organize. So within our cities are these underground spaces that we might know nothing of, but these are the safe spaces for people who are not wanted in everyday life.
Thanks so much for the reflection. Naz, as a partner with RISE, I think you'll forgive me if I ask for just a 1-minute reflection on what struck you in this conversation as something you'd like to take forward in the conversation.
Thank you for that, Paul. So I think definitely what Vanessa and many other amazing panelists said. So, but specifically what Vanessa said about addressing realities of issues that are affecting and destroying livelihoods, and also highlighting issues that are deeply political in order to be inclusive of everyone. I think that resonated very deeply with me because there are political interests underpinning most of these things, and rapid urbanization in our cities come with its own costs, especially for locals or original settlers of many of these regions. There are issues around evictions, but also displacements, forced migration, issues around how do these people struggle with building livelihood and having basic access to resources. So I think all of these are really, really relevant issues for us to keep examining as we also keep advocating for safe spaces, as Matthew just mentioned, but also sustainable urban spaces. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Naz. I'd like to express deep thanks to our panelists, as well as everyone who's joined us for these 2 hours now on our first session of the festival. I'd like to invite you to look at further sessions and register for other sessions. I feel heartbroken that this conversation's ended here. I needed another half hour at least. So if you would like to continue this conversation as panelists or as participants, we do have a daily debrief at 6 p.m. Central African time for those who can't join during the day to join and touch base. So you're more than welcome to join us in that session and reflect a little bit on what we've discussed here as well as other sessions. Kevin has just thrown these in the chat. We also have a little survey about the festival and the session that we would be very happy if you'd fill out. And most importantly, tell us, what do we need to put into our position piece at the outcome of this festival? So again, thank you very much for joining. We wish you many insights and joyful interactions throughout the festival, and look forward to seeing you in the next discussions. Thank you, everybody. Stay well.